Hello and welcome to today's webinar, everyone. My name is Paul Dunay, and I will be your host and moderator. Today's webinar is on Trust is the New Currency, Innovative Models for Business Transactions. Now, if you've been on a Social Media Today webinar before, you know we are very participant-driven, and we love your questions and want your questions. And there are two ways for you to be part of this webinar today. One is through Twitter using the hashtag #SMT Live. Again, hashtag #SMT Live, or via the GoToWebinar control panel. You can ask your questions, and I will get them in front of our rockstar panel of speakers today. Speaking of which, today I have Francesca Pick, a collaborative economy strategist and currently developing a community called We Share, that's OUI Share. She also wrote an award-winning thesis on building trust in a peer-to-peer marketplace. Also, David Amerland, noted author, speaker, and analyst on the intersection of social media and SEO. And Chris Abraham, the principal consultant at Juras Digital and the director of social media at Unison Agency. And of course, myself, Paul Dunay, the Global VP of Marketing at Maximizer. So we've got some examples to show you and some slides to get you thinking along these lines. I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk a little bit about trust from the angle of copywriting, sharing, and creating consistency of brand across platforms. So Chris, please take it away.
Sure, thank you. Can you move the slide forward, please? Thank you. I wanted to just jump into just a couple quick slides to, with regards to reputation and trust. The first guard seems to be the first step people tend to find in terms of their engagement in trust online is using common search. There are, of course, Bing and other types of search engines and meta engines, but Google seems to be the de facto, the go-to search engine for most people. And whether or not there are larger trust review platforms, such as the way Uber deals with both its car drivers and its its passengers. These are other types of trust relationships, but I just want to talk about how you can influence your trust relationship with regard to how people perceive you on Google. So I'm just jumping right in here. There's a lot of theories about how SEO works, and a lot of them do work. A lot of them are phenomenally expensive and very confusing and convoluted, and the landscape is changing every day as Google tries to tame, if you will, the Google sphere. But there are some really good ways that you can get and you can build a trust relationship with Google. That's one of the trust relationships you have to build is with a giant algorithm and a bunch of bots and spiders. So the first thing you need to do is you need to write copy and create a website that is accessible and happy-making for robots. That means that you have to be very explicit, and you have to treat Google like he's dumb and beautiful. Google doesn't have to really think too much about trying to figure out what you're on about. Google is very literal, so the more literal you can be, the better. Your biggest visitors to your websites are robots, so write for robots. People are only there a minute at a time. They're constantly there. Editors will kill you if you start writing for robots. The copy can be a little ponderous, but what you need to avoid at all costs is an overuse of pronouns. Google does not want to waste time sorting out, he said, she said, what he or she pronouns means. You need to spell out everything and all variations, because Google is very literal. So if you're Chris Abraham, you also maybe want to be Christopher Abraham. If you're Social Media Today, you'll probably also want to be Social Media Space Today. If you want to be, or SMT. If you're Garris, then you're Garris Digital or Garris Corp, etc. And then with regards to keyword linking, a lot of people spend so much money buying inbound links or hiring bloggers to include their brand in their keywords. What you should do just to start is to make sure that all of your properties are interlinked within yourself using keywords. That can include making sure that every page of your e-commerce site, your blog, links to other pages within your site, your blog. Google, strangely enough to this day, considers every page a separate thing and then looks at how the pages are stitched together to make assumptions on whether they're a site or a property or a brand. And then, you just look at it like a flotilla of boats tied together, like a bunch of pontoon boats on a lake during a party. You need to all tie them up together so that you can turn them into a little island. That will help Google figure you out. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to own as much of the first page of Google, the first 10 results, as possible. If you can own the first page of Google with regards to your keywords, and even if you can only have the top space with regards to your brand, but when it comes to reputation management and trust, when people search for you precisely, you want to have as much control of that first page as possible. Can you move it to the next page, please? Okay, social sharing. Recently, Google has changed the algorithm for two reasons. What they've tried to do is they've tried to make everybody more accountable. They've tried to make everybody more accountable using their real names. In the past, you could use a nom de plume, a nom de guerre. You can hide behind a brand. And they were having a lot of problem with spam content and so forth. So what Google's trying to do is it's trying to look at models of how real people react to real content and real sites. And they see, different concepts of movement and of sharing and of momentum and of distribution and popularity. So Google has decided that it needs to favor social media. It's trying to flush out the fraudsters. It's got a new thing called authorship. I'll show you the links in the next slide or so. They've got verification. Please go back one. Verification programs. And the true reason isn't only quality of results, it's also ad segmentation. They're just trying to separate the spam from the wheat. They're trying to find content that behaves like real content. And at the end of the day, you need to make things as shareable as possible so that people don't need to click once or twice to share things, but can just click and go. One rule, always offer your visitors the ability to share from anywhere and anywhere. I use the analogy, you give a child a toy in a box, you've never anticipated the child playing with the box. Do not make assumptions or guess as to what part of your content is shareable. It's not just your blog post. It's also bio pages and about us and everything else. Next page, please. Profile squatting. It's not a bad thing. You need to make sure that you have brand consistency upon all of your sites. Now, before you look too far down the page, I'm not even using Noam right now. I just recommend them to my friends and my clients and so forth because it's a very useful way of land grabbing with just a little bit of money. But none of the things I talk about on this page you are required to spend any money on. First of all, you need to figure out what your brand is going to be across all your platforms. I mean, with Chris Abraham, I own it everywhere. But with regards to Garris Corp or Garris or whatever, it's kind of mishmash. I need to figure that over time. The domain garris.com is available, but I have to decide whether I'm going to spend, $4,088 on it. Maybe it's worth it to me. Is it? And then keep prospecting and squatting for the next best thing. When I talk about squatting, I mean getting your Twitter account, your Facebook account, and your Instagram account, and so forth. And then talk to Google, Twitter, and Facebook. I've been able to secure dozens of Twitter handles that are using brands like, URLs, custom URLs, like handles on Twitter that I found aren't being used, and I reach out to my contacts at Twitter, Facebook, and Google+, and I say, hey, how come I can't register this? And after doing a little bit of due diligence, a lot of the time they'll help you if they can, especially if you have a strong brand representation and aren't just, squatting for profit. And if it's abandoned, they'll release it. And then finally, know them for, upwards of from 84.95 to 649. You can have someone else squat all your profiles up to, 300 profiles. And if you give them your bio, description, bio, and photo, obviously bio is important. And if they let you, make sure that you pre-link that, because if you pre-link it to your other properties, it would allow you to start stitching together those sites that you've worked on. And then when you're done, they'll hand you the keys. They're not going to hold it ransom for you. They'll give you all the login and passwords. And then finally, my last slide, and I hope I'm going fast enough for everybody, is your firstborn to Google. At the end of the day, Google is coercing us with gentle kisses to give up our anonymity and buy completely into Google. And I believe that at the end of the day, Google rewards those people with whom they have a trust relationship. So this list is just a useful list for you. Join AdWords, even if you don't plan to advertise. Join AdSense, even if you don't plan to host ads. Go to Google Webmaster Tools, Google Analytics. Just sign up, because what Google's going to get from you is more and more of your information. Register for Google Plus, and even if you don't have a relationship with Google Plus, cross-post from Facebook everything that you do onto Google Plus. Upload images to Google Plus. Google Plus needs some love. And it's because it's been abandoned almost except for real technocrats or technologists and technorati and people who are already trying to use it as a platform for Google gaming. And then fill out everything in the Google account page that they then offer to let you fill out, including every single other social network that you belong to, every other website that you write for, every other corporate entity that you work with. And then make sure that you publish the social accounts at Google Connected Accounts. The links will be online, or you can search them. And then go to Google Authorship if you are a writer online, and make sure that you have added, you're on your way to becoming completely verified, okay? If you have a Google business page, go through the process of getting verified by having them send a postcard to your house or your office. And then if you can't get a verification through that, try to go through support channels to get that. And if you do really have amazing content like Social Media Today does, you can apply to become a news source for Google News. Anyway, that's my content, and if you have any questions for me afterwards, we'll be able to talk about it during the panel session.
Great. No, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that. Interesting to see the emphasis that you're putting on Google Plus, and I've often felt it's a little bit underloved as well. So very interesting. Andrew Williams has a quick question for you before we turn it over to Francesca, who's got some interesting views we want to hear. He was just asking, what is profile squatting? He wasn't familiar with the term. Maybe you can help define that for him before we move on.
Sure. In the past, there was a term that they used to call domain squatting or URL squatting, where people would go out and they would squat. They would squat all kind of like big brand names like Coca-Cola.com. This was in the early days before people were savvy. There's a lot of people who believe that grabbing I fully believe that for between $7 and $25 a year, you should go out there and buy as many domain names as you can based on variations of the keywords of the work you do, as well as variations of your name, as well as different top-level domains and country codes, etc. As many as you can get, and as many as your partners can get if they live in other countries, such as DE and .fr, etc. I lived in Berlin, and for a while I had my DE and my EU domains. What now I call profile squatting is making sure that you go out there. And you join all the social media platforms, as many as you can, and even if you don't plan to use them, you need to go in there. You need to register for them. If you aren't using Instagram at the moment, go in there, upload a profile photo or a brand photo, fill out all of your information, and make sure that, and even if you want to put a photo up on Instagram saying, hey, if you want to find us on Facebook, but make sure that someone else, a squatter, can't come in there and grab your name, Chris Abraham, or your brand, social media today, especially on nascent sites, early sites where there are very few users. You need to try to keep your eyes out and make sure that you go in there and grab them before someone else does, because it can make your social media future a little spotty because you won't be able to get your consistent brand name, such as twitter.com/Chris Abraham. I have that over everything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's really great. And, when I first saw your slide about the firstborn to Google, it made me think about when my kids were born and how I went and bought the domain name. I got the, Facebook URL, of their exact name. So like, let's say Peter Dunay as one word, or their Google Gmail as, Peter Dunay as one word, that kind of a thing. So interesting on how you're thinking about that as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn
one aside. One quick aside.
Go ahead. Sure.
One quick aside. One thing I noticed is with regards to domain names, other countries use domain names in different ways. Sometimes, for example, in Germany, they tend to put hyphens between the words. So Chris-Abraham is more appealing to the German internet user than Chris Abraham, if you will. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, it just so happens we have Francesca up next. Francesca is going to talk to us about peer-to-peer marketplaces and how they can build trust amongst their community. So, Francesca, can you take it away?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. So we heard a lot about the organizational perspective of building trust, and now I'm going to talk a bit more about building trust between individuals, because there's a lot of peer-to-peer marketplaces nowadays. So some of them are probably quite known to you. For instance, things like Airbnb, where you can see on my slide right now, which is a platform where individuals can rent out their homes to other travelers. And so on a platform like this, it's very important not only that Airbnb as a brand is trusted, but also that the individuals that interact with one another can trust each other. And so there's a number of different types of verifications and tools that have developed to help individuals rate each other and really get a very holistic vision of who this other person is that they can see on the site, and really makes it a lot easier for people to be able to trust complete strangers. And so what's very interesting to see is that there's a huge mixture between the organizational brand and trust and the trust of individuals. So of course, a person who doesn't trust Airbnb won't even go to the site in the first place. And it's a very important thing to think about when you're building your brand and you want to be trusted as an organization. So here in this screenshot of Airbnb, you can see a profile of people offering an apartment in Madrid. And just to give sort of an overview, because Airbnb is really one of the most elaborate, has the most elaborate trust and safety area. So they have an entire team of people working on this, and they're really very advanced in this area. So you can see you have different types of verifications, such as email addresses, phone numbers. You have different ratings. So if you go to the next, I think it's cut off on the slide, but actually there's a 5-star rating system, which is very similar to the rating system that you also know from Amazon, which is also extremely important. And so this is really one of the main factors that other people use to decide who they are going to stay with. And now, so when you look at these different trust mechanisms, there's a lot of platforms that are developing their own in-house trust solutions, as for instance Airbnb. But then there's also been the emergence of different kinds of third-party platforms that are a bit like individual social networks that aggregate different sources of trust in a new platform. And so that means, in a way, all these different marketplaces can outsource the building of trust between individuals to another service. And so that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. That's Trust Cloud is one example of such a service, which I worked for 1 year ago, because after writing my bachelor thesis about building trust in peer-to-peer marketplaces, I had analyzed several different of these solutions that are emerging, and it's very interesting to see how they're being used by individuals and organizations. So Trust Cloud is an online platform that aggregates different types of data regarding your reputation on the web. So that includes social networks like Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, but also very tangible information like verifications of your address, your phone, email addresses, and also some softer data or more qualitative, as you can see in these different trust badges that are on my profile here. And so the way Trust Cloud works is it aggregates all this information to a trust score, which you can see on the right, and there's sort of a different rating of things. And in general, there's several other marketplaces, several other platforms that have developed these types of solutions for aggregating these different data, some with a score and some without, to make it easy for people to show how trustworthy they are on the web. And so what's most interesting about this, and which unfortunately also is cut off on the screen, is that there's something called a trust badge. And that's just like a little business card that you can integrate on different marketplaces, or also e-commerce sites. And that can sort of serve as a kind of identity card that shows how trustworthy you are. And so this is like a little badge that displays all the aggregated information that Trust Cloud has collected about you on different marketplaces.
Yeah, I think it's actually on the next slide, Francesca. If we can move to the next slide,
oh yes, please, can do that. Right, exactly. So here you can see the portable trust badge, and that's really one of the key elements of these types of systems, because what people have noticed very often is, for instance, if someone is a big seller on eBay, for instance, or is very active on Amazon, you aggregate lots of great ratings on one site. But then if you go to a new service that you try, it has a very high barrier of entry because you start at zero again. So the idea of this is to really be able to collect all the reputation that you've earned on the web and to then use it on a new platform that you're just joining, where you have actually don't have any credentials yet. So that really will make it a lot easier for new people to join your service because they have something to bring with them already. And one other thing that's very interesting about this is that these kind of platforms are enabling not only individuals but also organizations to build trust by the members of their organization to join. So one thing that I always find very important is that you don't only build your brand and your trust as the organization as such, but it really consists of all the individual employees that work there. And so through the web, it's becoming a lot more common that, each individual has their own reputation and their presence on the web, and they spread the message of your brand to the world. So each of them can join platforms like Trust Cloud and use these different reputation systems to spread your message and show how trustworthy you are.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for that example. And just as a quick commercial for what you said, during D, I was going to live in Portugal with family. Couldn't find a place to stay in town. They were having a massive convention, and I used Airbnb to rent a person's apartment in downtown Lisbon. I mean, a beautiful apartment. Guy handed me the keys. I mean, what kind of trust does that hand somebody the keys to your apartment in a downtown metropolis city like that? And not knowing me, I had also signed up for Trust Cloud as well, so I think he had some indication of that I was a trustworthy individual, et cetera. But talk about handing somebody the keys to your house. I mean, that's almost one of the ultimate barometers of do you trust an individual or not. Anyway, so not a commercial for either of these two products, but just just a wonderful thought on trust and how you need to gauge trust before entering into some kind of contract like that. Now, before we drop into Q&A, please let us know if you have any questions. I am monitoring Twitter and also the GoToWebinar control panel. We'd love to know what you want to know about trust. So please go ahead and put in those questions. In the meantime, I've got a question for David. David, when Chris was talking about search, I know there have been some changes recently to SEO where they're doing things. Did that have any major impact on the semantic search guidelines? And do you have any view on that you can share with the audience before we drop into Q&A?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for bringing it up. Looking at Chris's guidelines when he started his presentation, I became very conscious of the fact that I've seen this before, and every time I talk to conglomerate, large corporate clients, there's always a little bit of a dynamic between the agency guidelines which they put in place and what Google actually needs a company to do. The semantic web is basically run on contextualization and personalization. So essentially, writing for robots is certainly not something that should be advisable right now. You should always write for people first, and robots are far, far, far second. And certainly the keyword content, keyword-focused content of the past should no longer be in effect either. In semantic web, keywords are a very weak signal, and what Google is actually looking for is the theme and the content of a page in order to understand what the page is about, which then comes led to the intent of the search itself, not the keywords used by the searcher. And we're certainly moving. And classic example of this is the pronouns, which Chris quite correctly said didn't work in the past. They didn't. Google didn't look at them. Actually, do not. We have conversational search where you can ask a question on Google search using voice, and can ask how old is President Obama, for instance. You get an answer, and you say, is he married? And certainly the way he is actually linked to President Obama, Google understands the pronoun is linked there and gives you the answer to that. So this is an awareness that search is a very floating environment to be in. The guidelines do change all the time, and this is no direct criticism to Chris, because agencies have to work in the real world. And the transition from the old Boolean search of the past to semantic search has us now in a gray zone where certain industries still work very much with the guidelines of the past, and they're very successful there, and other industries do not. The best guideline always is to now work with people in mind when you're creating content. And certainly when you're using any kind of SEO, it should be people-orientated as opposed to search bots. And that is usually the most valid guideline to use.
And I do agree that, the first line of defense, let's say, that Chris brought up was, they're going to look you up on search. They're going to do a search for you. And sort of, making sure that whatever result is of the highest quality, obviously is an important piece. As I understand the changes, it favors, or Google is favoring more content creation on your own properties, and I think, Chris, you were getting a little bit at that, rather than writing for inbound links. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct, certainly. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever you do on the web these days has to answer a simple question, and the simple question is it going to be of value to the reader? Now, in the past, everything we did was governed by SEO metrics. So we wanted to be shown in search because it's how people found us. And the way to be shown in search was to attract the attention of search engines. But you did this very technically, and you created content that appealed to them first. You got in a lot of people through the front door, and then you created a sales funnel trying to weed them down to the people who you targeted audience. And really, search doesn't work like this anymore. The first page of Google, which is the traditional first page of Google, is changing. It's not the same for everybody. So basically, there's a first page of Google which is different for every person who actually carries out a search. So to say I rank for this particular keyword, for instance, is becoming a bit of a misleading kind of metric, which some companies and brands and individuals need to be aware of. So really, you're writing from the heart now, I suppose, in terms of creating content that actually appeals to the reader. And in doing so, now we're getting to the trust factor, because you're actually answering the questions of who you are, what are you doing, and how do you do it? And if you answer those questions correctly, then you become an entity in terms of you're doing something unique because nobody else is actually doing it in exactly the same way as you are, even though they may actually be active in the same industry sector. And that's where the uniqueness of the individual comes out. The success of any business, really, is in finding its audience, its core audience. And the moment you have the core audience, then that is your audience. They actually trust you. And I was very happy to see Francesca actually talk about the trust mechanisms, because we use those mechanisms in the web in order to establish an awareness of whether we are willing to do business with somebody or not when we don't actually have met them before, which is exactly what reputation is. Now, in the past, however, trust is always there. And it was there because we worked in very closed environments without actually being online as we have now. And we had our own offline sort of a set of guidelines which allowed us to establish contact with somebody and see if they were trustworthy or not. When we scale to the web, those things become distant now because we don't have a personal connection. We don't have a very close network to actually work with. So how do we establish trust in that environment? There are usually 4 steps which have to happen. And the first step is contact. Contact can be through search. It can be through content. It can be reputational, through a trust badge perhaps. And after the contact, we're going to perception, because the individual has to perceive whether they're willing to actually give the attention that they need, that this person is asking for, in order to go through the stages which will lead to closer contact. And after that, we go to assessment. And if the assessment stage is successful, we go into direct contact, basically. So, which is a connection. So basically, these are the 4 steps. And every mechanism we put on the web these days needs to allow these 4 steps to actually take place. So somebody needs to find you. You need to make contact. You need to project the right kind of content so that you actually give them the correct kind of perception about what you do. You need to give them enough material to assess you, and then you come to the connection. And if they're successful, then trust is established and a relational exchange takes place. Whether that relational exchange is exchanging information or carrying out a transaction is really immaterial because the mechanism is the same.
Okay, very interesting. I noticed a tweet out by Heather McLean that apparently Trust Cloud is inundated from folks from this session since the servers are kind of bogged down. That's kind of cool. All right, so I'd like to say that trust is sort of in the eye of the beholder, right? We've talked a lot about search now and, you know, what happens when people search and what kind of content you should put up. What tools, and this is really for everyone on the line, you know, what tools are we aware of that can measure trust for us? So if we're a, you know, marketer in a company and we're new to the role and we have some work to do in rebuilding trust, how do we get a handle on a baseline of where we are? Is there a measurement system out there, David, Chris, or Francesca, that you're aware of?
There are 2 mechanisms there which actually exist. One is what we call social proof, and social proof is the first initial veneer which is supplied by the social web, which is the number of likes on Facebook, for instance, that a company gets, the number of +1s in G+, or the number of tweets, the number of followers. Now, these are metrics. These are numbers which basically, at first glance, gives an assumption of credibility, and which then goes on to verify trust. But they're not sufficient, and certainly they're not sufficient for semantic search because it disregards them almost completely as very weak signals because precisely they're very easy to gain. So anything which is easy to gain is not a good signal already. So then after the social proof, we get into engagement. Engagement is the only true measure of trust because it goes to building reputation, and your reputation is what allows you to create trust with people who have never met you before and are trying to decide whether to do business with you or not. And engagement really cannot be faked, because if you have your engagement with your audience, they're real people. They're really actually listening to you, they're giving you their attention, and they're processing what you said. And if you try to do this in a sort of very half-hearted way or an automated way, it's simply going to backfire. So essentially, engagement in its various formats in each platform, because it takes different formats, is the primary key factor of online trust, which generates reputation. And if your engagement is right, then obviously you also come up in search. you come up, your visibility increases, people find you a lot more easily, and that also becomes part of the perceived value of your company or brand.
Yeah. Other thoughts on how to gauge trust, Chris or Francesca?
Well, so
I
totally.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say I totally agree with what David said, because I think that it's very hard to find actual tools that really help you measure that, because it's such an intangible thing, and really just your user's behavior, which is what he meant by engagement, is really what reflects the trust that they have, and of course the retention rate. So do they continue to use your service or visit your platform? Because if they leave, then maybe they don't think you're trustworthy.
Yeah, and I think that there's a difference between how the common man perceives prestige or trust and how someone who's in a media lab would perceive trust. Very simple things such as how many likes still and how many followers on Twitter. Even in terms of discernment, people don't even correctly discern the advertisements at the top of Google or inline advertisements in Twitter and Facebook. Advertising seems to be a way of bullying in on trust in terms of perception, not true. And also people who buy, like even the President of the United States has been just bought millions of fake followers on Twitter. Yet, for the President of the United States not to be up there right with Katy Perry and so forth is a Justin Bieber is a perception nightmare. So I hate to say it because I'm a purist, but I hate to say it that I've gotten gigs just because of the number of followers on Twitter I've had, and also by throwing out my 77 or 78, depending on what week it is, outscore, and I've actually advised clients, hey, you have 0 likes on your Facebook page. You have 0 followers on Twitter. I can't even do an aggressive following campaign because if I follow too many people, our profile's going to get locked down. Why don't we go ahead and, buy 10,000 followers and 10,000 likes just to get us out of the gate, which is the equivalent in the discotheque of going out to a modeling agency and saying, I want 20 beautiful young men and women to come into my discotheque because we just opened, and I want every night for people to get to the up the red carpet to the velvet rope and see party happening in my discotheque. Like, this isn't real trust. This is perception, but it's strange how amongst the normals, if you will, there seems to be a real perception in the things that as they extrapolate from their own thing. They're like, I only have 150 friends on Facebook, so your 5,000 is impressive to me. So it's important to also deal with perception and optics in addition to the true nature of trust.
Okay. I feel like we're talking a lot about some B2C type of ways, things like, as Rena Starr mentioned in her tweet, Rena says, Yelp, Foursquare, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google reviews can be great, to build trust. For a business, though, I was expecting maybe one of the speakers to mention, like, the Fred Reichheld Net Promoter Score, that kind of a thing. Something I stumbled on recently called Trust Radius, oneword.com. It's a place that does reviews kind of like Yelp for businesses. So there's, in full disclosure, Maximizer is listed on Trust Radius, and I've been watching it very closely. They're independent reviews. And that could be one of these things where people try to game them with, different reviews. But it was started basically because I think the original thesis was, you can find, 10,000 reviews of a burrito shop, for a $10 burrito, but you can't find, more than 1 or 2 reports online for a, $1 million software system. Right, so that was their starting thesis and starting Trust Radius. Anyway, so other ways for a business maybe to gauge would be those types of vehicles. Now, what can a business do to kind of we've talked a little bit about cleaning up a situation where they need help or building more trust. What ways can we use social to really help propel that?
Well, there are a couple of ways, and they are both labor-intensive. Essentially, social acts as, particularly in the semantic web, which is transition from a website of a web of websites to a web of people, as Google itself has said. Social is the amplification point of any kind of corporate or branding message. If you don't have a strong, engaged social presence, particularly as we're getting into the world of personalized search, where your friends' contacts and your friends of friends begin to appear on search, then you're losing out on an opportunity to have your content surface tangentially outside your own audience. So social web is key to both creating the kind of credibility which will allow your content to surface in many places, and also create a kind of credibility which comes by a referral from somebody whom you know and trust, and you happen to be in their network, and therefore you can see their choices. And this is pretty much where the traditional social media marketing and semantic search and SEO as it is done now are beginning to sort of fall under one agenda or one umbrella. And that is the critical factor here, is that it does become hard to game. I mean, Chris mentioned social proof and numbers, and certainly they're convinced he's absolutely right at a superficial glance. But when it comes to search, and in his first slide again, beautifully he said that people go to search to actually find you, and the normals, as he mentioned, are not very sophisticated in terms of tracking reputation, but they will go and search and will carry out a search for a company or a brand, hoping to find out whether they can trust it or not. And whether you surface in just your website or you surface in a lot of different places, whether it's engaged with real people, then becomes part of the trust factor algorithm that we personally are hardwired to process in order to decide whether to trust a company or a brand and make a purchasing decision. So social is important. And the second bit on this course is being real and authentic. And that goes very much with the kind of content that you now create. We have been conditioned over the last 50, 80 years to project a very faced, very blunt, very corporate kind of look, because we were taught that the slicker it looks and the more distant it looks, the perception is that it's more professional. And the figures I see now from my corporate clients who work in different markets is that the slicker and more corporate the look of what they do, the less appeal it actually has. So they're beginning to reformat their approach to a more personal and personable kind of web. So basically, they're talking to people on a one-to-one basis, because at the end of the day, we are hardwired to do business with people rather than do business as people with businesses. And again, this is sort of supported by the entire intuitive trust mechanism we are sort of geared to work with. And that's the approach that actually creates a sense of trustworthiness in a brand on the web these days. And it has to be factored into their marketing.
Yeah, maybe if I can
that reflects beautifully. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so that sort of really connects also with what I was saying before, that it's good not to have your organization be represented as something that's sort of, faceless and has like very official communications that aren't very personalized, but that really each employee in your company is a face of the organization and should go and solicit people and speak individually on the web, and that really puts together a very authentic, holistic view of your organization that can become a lot more trustworthy and real in the eye of the beholder, and that really you need to speak to each member of your company to understand that they can really speak for them and engage in individual communications on social media and blogging and so on to really bring that reputation to your audience.
I think I thank you, David, for being on this panel, because after 10 years in ORM, online reputation management, I think I've become a little cynical. But what you've said with regards to the semantic web and the web of trust focuses most on the individual and then on the brand is reflected perfectly in terms of what Google is doing by flushing out people in terms of their individual real names, and then the properties that they oversee and control and engage with and produce for. So what you're saying is mirrored by what Google is in the desperate pursuit of doing at the moment. But I also find, in terms of that gray area you were talking about, there's a lot of pushback by big SEO to try to make sure that this progress isn't as straightforward, and that a lot of the tips and tricks, there's a lot of money in ORM and SEO, that every time Google moves forward with this, with its algorithm, it tends to roll back a little bit as well and seed back, like it takes three hills in terms of this new semantic web. It tends to give back too, because of the kind of feedback and how it destroys people's income, and I'm sure also Google's income.
Yeah. So,
Chris, you're absolutely right. And this is exactly, this is exactly the point you're making, that indeed it's not a straightforward approach, and you can't take us away from an old-fashioned web to semantic search for things transparent, based on trust and trustworthiness, and trust itself is algorithmically worked out in many places. You're right in that semantic search is scaling gradually, although a lot faster than we actually expected. And there are still areas where it is imperfect. And in that imperfect area, in that very real gray zone, which is the working ground we're in right now, there are also pressures placed upon individuals and companies working in that field to actually deliver results for companies. So there is that human factor where, you get paid to do a job and you have to deliver fast. So you're trying to do everything you can in order to get that delivery of results that your livelihood depends on, which is absolutely right. I mean, you have to work like that. It will change, and I think your presentation was fantastic in terms of, you said that we're becoming more honest on the web because we can see that actually pays off, and I think that's exactly the transition that we're seeing these days, and it's a painful one, I must say.
I really like what you guys were saying, especially in the area of getting a lot of the people within the organization. And I think, Francesca, you were making this point too. To be out there speaking for the company or blogging or tweeting, adding their voice really adds a lot to rounding out, the reputation and the trust that a company may have. One area that I wanted to ask about is, what role could, let's say, advocates or influencers, it's a very favorite topic here on the Social Media Today webinars, is the use of advocates and influencers. What role can they play in building trust? I don't know, Francesca, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, well, they definitely play a very important role in that. Also at WeShare, we've been really working a lot with that in terms of really building strong relationships with thought leaders and influencers about your sector, space, or topic. And of course, mostly getting them to really be enthusiastic about what you're doing and speaking about what it is you are to their following. And as we were saying, people are looking more towards individuals than organizations for getting opinions on things or understanding whether something is trustworthy or not. So the voice of these thought leaders is extremely important, and often maybe more important than having another organization speak well about you, because people really just tend to trust individuals more than institutions nowadays.
And it can be individuals. It can be, go ahead.
My bread and butter is blogger outreach, real long tail blogger outreach, where you reach out to thousands of bloggers and activate them on behalf of brands through earned media. So you have to earn their trust and get them to cover brand sort of PR. And so what I'm going to say is you need to activate your natural ambassadors. You need to do a giant Yelp, a giant Ali Oxenfree, and you need to take the people who are your current past clients, and you need to take that email list you have and those followers you have on Twitter and Facebook already, and you need to activate them in whatever particular direction you need, whether that's going to Yelp if you are a proper corner store or restaurant. But it's so hard to do that. You need to find a way of discerning the positive and neutral people, because you're also possibly going to activate the negative people. However, if they're already followers of yours, they're probably not negative if they're on your listserv. But getting people, and what Francesca said was true. She didn't precisely say it, but having someone else say things nice about you is infinitely more powerful, and I think you did say this, than having you say nice things about yourself. So finding a way to make it a third-person reference to you is hyper valuable. But it's not poor form. You don't have to wait for the nice thing to be said about you. You don't have to wait for it to happen organically. You can ask people to do it, and those people, you already have relationships with them.
Can I just add something here, because I think both Chris and Francesca touched on something which is critically important. And Chris, I love the fact that you've got blogger outreach, and you're right, they're very difficult to activate correctly. And the reason this is such a critical area is that definitely influencers can help you amplify your brand or your brand message, because they have their own already built up networks. And because there's a trust factor within their own network, because they are the trusted authority in it, the threshold barrier of any kind of message which they send through it is a lot lower, and the receptivity factor is a lot higher. However, there is a lot of material these days being put out on influencer marketing, and the perception is that the influencer is some sort of shepherd with his flock of tens of thousands of sheep, and whatever he says they will do. And this is certainly not the case. The influencer himself runs on the trust of his network, which means that he becomes the sieve through which everything is sifted through. If he thinks that whatever he's going to put through is not of high value to his network, he won't put it. So basically, he's also the barrier to overcome, which means that if you're trying to create an influencer marketed model for your business or your brand, you need to make sure that there's perfect alignment between the values that the influencer has and what you're trying to achieve, that there's great content which has intrinsic value in what you're trying to actually share, and that's when you will actually catch their attention and be able to take advantage of their position. To just find influencers, target them and say, hey, we do this great stuff, why don't you push it to your network? That certainly will not work, and in many ways it backfires, and I see it frequently within the social media crisis meetings I have to go through and go to. So there is that awareness. This is again comes down to trust and how we create a kind of trust through people, which is on the web a totally different way of working. Suddenly we're using people to rank and rate content in terms of a trust factor, which means that as content creators, we need to be aware of the value of what we're actually doing. Just doing it mindlessly and checking a box and saying it's done, it no longer works. There has to be a reason of why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? What value will it have for the reader? Then who is the best possible point for amplifying this? Who has the best network which aligns with the values of what we have? And if you can answer those questions correctly, then the job becomes a lot easier. And it's a win-win-win all down the chain. If you can't, then you get into the adversarial position of having to creating potential crisis, which you then have to solve.
Yeah, and just a quick comment, Chris, from Heather McLean out on the Twitter sphere. She gave us a heads up on email lists and the new spam law effective in Canada, which applies to the U.S. If you're reaching out to your Canadian email list, apparently there's some big fines there. So interesting on activating those influencers and advocates or ambassadors, as you were calling them. So let's switch gears just a little bit here and talk about how. Go ahead. I'm sorry. All right.
No, I was just saying that with regards to blogger outreach via email as well. If you're going to reach out to a blogger, he had better be blogging, and you'd better not be selling him something, because even in the U.S., unless someone is a journalist, if you will, and you are pitching them news, if you will, but if you're trying to get them to use your product directly, that also is within the CAN spam law. So it's a very prickly place, and But generally, if people are doing it by hand and really trying to get people to look at their content and to review it, it's a business relationship. It's a pre-approved, what's it called, opted-in relationship.
Right. Excellent. All right, changing gears here in our last few minutes, let's talk about how do you organize for success in this particular area. How do companies organize trust? Is this some sort of an overlay team? Who owns this in the organization? Does it fall in social? Is it interactive marketing? Where? Let's go around the horn and just give me your viewpoints on, where does this, where's it owned? Where does it reside?
That's a great question, and critically it has to be with all the contact points an organization actually has. And in order for trust to be engineered outside an organization, it has to be first engineered within it. And that's quite a difficult thing to do. We must bear in mind that legacy organizations, which is what we see predominantly right now, are not really geared up for trust internally. They have processes and have reports and have all these different types of contact points, which are designed to check content and veracity within them, but certainly not create trust in the people that operate. So essentially, the organizations themselves are undergoing a restructuring. You can't hunt anything unless you think like it. And this is one of these old traditions and laws in hunting. So essentially, an organization looking for its customers and wanting them to trust it must also become like them. It must be fluid, it must be quick, it must be agile, it must not be compartmentalized within its walls, and it must have an open culture which is vocal and certainly connected. And these are difficult things to do because they're disruptive in their own right. Organizations which do it successfully, we have Zappos, which are now part of Amazon, and they've always led the way there. We have Ford, which led the way in the social web, Coca-Cola in certain regions, not always, and we have in the tech industries, we have NetApp, for instance, which is a very forward-looking cloud storage company, and it's German, frequently tweets himself and connects to the public as a person rather than an organization talking about his organization and becoming touch points. These are radical examples, and they're far and few between, but they show how it can actually be done. So you need to try and generate trust within your own organization first, and then it begins to seep out outside.
Yeah. Chris or Francesca, any thoughts on how it gets owned in individual organizations?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question, Paul. I definitely think that nobody should own trust in one organization, so it definitely isn't one specific person or part of the organization. Even just asking the question like that sort of gives you the wrong idea, I think, because it should be distributed within the entire organization and is a fundamental part of the organizational culture that should be lived within it and then will be projected outside. So really in line with what David just said.
Interesting. So no chief trust officer emerging anywhere. I hear in your voice, maybe instead of the old adage,
well, actually,
maybe it's always be trust, building trust or something like that.
Well, as I was mentioning before, actually, Airbnb, for instance, they have a whole trust and safety area now, which with several employees, they have trust and safety officers that are only in charge of that. But I think they're mainly actually policing the different offers, and if there's any disturbances or problems, then they take care of it. So it's more like the safety area. So it is a little paradox, but I think that's maybe not the best way to go.
Building on what Francesca just said, quite rightly, I think you'll never have a trust officer in any kind of sense, because trust is an emergent phenomenon. It is the result of many other things, because like Airbnb, they keep an eye on different processes, because their efficiency in the way they're being run and how they are actually connect with the public is what generates trust in the first place. What we're seeing increasingly is that companies are looking to create specific positions for social media offices or social media people responsible for social media on a global scale. And again, Ford has that with Scott Monty, who's head of social media global.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who's actually most successful in this process.
Right. I feel we could spend a whole webinar on this particular topic, but go ahead, Chris. Final comment?
Well, just real quick, Scott Monty, who used to work with me back in the day at Crayon, is not afraid of his followers and friends online. I think two big mistakes. People are afraid of the online world as if it's a big thing of dynamite. Secondly, or they have contempt for these people in bunny shoes. There needs to be a real respect in that every one of those numbers of friends and followers online are real people with hopes, dreams, and needs.
Definitely. Yeah, again, I think this could be a webinar unto its own. And speaking of which, we have an upcoming webinar next week, the social government versus the social citizen. So we'd love to see you on that particular webinar. I'd like to thank David, Chris, and Francesca for being on today's webinar. A great panel with some great talent. And also everyone who joined us. We really love your questions, and we really enjoy having you be part of our conversation. And I think that's really what distinguishes us with some of these webinars. So we hope to see you on next week's webinar, The Social Government Social Citizen. And until then, we will speak with you then. Thanks for joining today, guys.